Hello and welcome to Pairing Pages. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Libby Brodie, wine consultant and columnist for City AM, and I'm going to be talking to Hannah Dolby, author of No Life for a Lady, which is the book we're going to be discussing. Hold it there, hold it higher so you can see it all. And I've paired it with a couple of fantastic wines from Australian wine producer Wynn. So I'm just going to very quickly show those on screen. So I've already started, but the first one we got is the Wynn Estate Chardonnay Vintage 2020, and we'll also be drinking. Here we have the Wynn Coonawarra Estate Shiraz 2020. Just checking you can all see those labels. So Wynn's is regarded as among Australia's greatest producers of premium Coonawarra wine, Coonawarra being a wine region made famous for its specific Terra Rossa soil. They were established, I think, in 1951, but Coonawarra's first vines were planted in 1890, which makes it perfect for this book, which is set in 1896. And so Wynn's are actually the longest established producer of the region, as well as the largest single vineyard holder. And fittingly, given the themes in your book, Hannah, Wynn's is headed up by two female winemakers, both Sarah Pigeon and senior winemaker Sue Hodder, who's one of Australia's best known and revered winemakers and has been there, I believe, for I think over 30 years now. So I've already poured myself a glass of the Chardonnay, which is one of my favorite grapes. Hannah, welcome, first of all, Hannah, thanks for coming and speaking with me today. Do you have these wines with you as well?
I do. I haven't poured them yet, so I'll pour myself a wine.
I hope everyone watching, they all have your glasses charged with something delicious as well. Just to talk a little bit about, I love this book, by the way. Thank you so much. I'm so glad this is the book that we're talking about, because I hoovered this up in 2 sittings. It's so well paced and it's so exciting, and it kept unfolding and becoming more and more intriguing as it went on. So everyone out there, this book follows basically a very strong female protagonist navigating what is essentially a man's world. Though there's many brilliant female characters in the book. So Violet Hamilton is 28, and it's a lot about the expectations that society has on her, which is namely to get married and do charity work and be a lady. And she has this huge drive to be useful and, to work and to sort of carve her own way in the world. And she really doesn't want to get married. And the way she deflects suitors is often very, very funny. But the whole key thing in this book that sort of sets off the story really is that she has this burning desire to find her mother, who disappeared mysteriously. Oh, my video's gone off. I don't know why. She has this burning desire to basically find her mother, who disappeared 10 years ago. And it leads her to employ 1 and 2 sort of detectives, then sort of become a lady detective herself, and there's tons of adventures along the way, and it's really very witty. And Hannah, I love some of your phrases. Your way with words is so evocative. I think one of my favorites was you write at one point, this woman oozed jollity like warm jam in summer, and I just thought that was such a perfect description. I completely got what you meant. And I believe you won with this book runner-up in the Comedy Women in Print Awards.
Absolutely, that's right. Yes, I got.
So please, can you tell me a bit more about those awards and what that was?
Yes, so basically, I'd been writing my novel for quite a while, and it was very serious, and poor Violet was having a very rough time of it. Slightly miserable Victorian repressed time of it. And then I spotted the Comedy Women in Print Awards, which are run by Helen Lederer. And it's just an inspirational, joyful prize, really. And seeing the prize really inspired me. So I took a bit of a punt, and I entered my first 3 chapters of my novel, and then got longlisted, and I had to submit the full novel. And the secret I don't tell many people is that I hadn't got so far with the full novel when I got longlisted. So I had to write it at full speed and enter it into the competition. And then I got joint second in the competition, which was amazing. That was last November. And since then, things have moved so fast. I've got an agent and the book's got published, and it's just been a very exciting, joyful ride for me. So yeah, it's been fantastic.
I mean, it sounds absolutely amazing. And would you tell us a bit more about your own experience of writing and how you got into writing to begin with?
Of course, so I did study it, but it's about 30 years ago now, so it was part of my university course, but yeah, a long time ago. And then I haven't really done much for a good more than 20 years with it. I've worked in PR for a long time. In various jobs. I've worked for Buckingham Palace and the Royal Horticultural Society, so really interesting PR jobs, but not had a chance to write. And then only about 5 or 6 years ago, I got back into it. And I've done quite a few different writing courses. I did Curtis Brown, I did kind of day workshops, a few on comedy writing. And it's just that feeling of getting back into writing is wonderful. But I think I probably wouldn't have been able to write the book if I hadn't spotted the Comedy Women in Print Awards, because I was struggling, and there was something about just being able to write in a funny way that set me off, and I was like a horse racing off into the distance, just sort of writing and getting all those words down. It's very freeing. So I suppose what I'd say to other writers is find your genre, find what sets you free, find what makes those words pour out onto the page.
I think that's really beautiful. And it's interesting you're saying about the comedy aspect, because there are actually, and I wanted to talk about this a bit later, but I think it's a good time to raise it now. But there are various things in the book that are quite serious, dramatic, sad moments. But do you think points, are highlighted better when using humor or comedy to do so? Because, I mean, do you think that's something that's important in your writing, that you use comedy to bring out quite harsh realities of the world?
I think so. I think it's very much, I mean, people I've spoken to about writing, it's very much about the light and the dark. And often you can understand the harsh realities of life a little bit better if you approach them with humor, because it's not quite so shocking when you read it.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of approach where you're perhaps laughing at things that aren't even what you shouldn't be laughing at because they're quite serious, but that's often a human mechanism in life to cope with life's worst moments, I think. Yeah. So very much for me, I think, yes, I am writing about issues that could be quite tragic, but that kind of humor allows people to read it more easily. It brings it to life, but it also, I think, gives you that kind of light and dark in the book as well.
I think I would definitely describe this as a very joyful book. Like, it's enjoyable to read. It takes you on this lovely journey, but there are big issues there of sort of sexism, the male gaze, feminism, often done in a very funny way. There's a moment when she's describing various suitors, and it says something like, another short on teeth and politeness tried to embrace me in an orangery, his arms wide as I dodged away from him among the small potted trees, which is a very amusing image. But what's really being described there and elsewhere in the book is a predator and sexual assault. And later on, there's a man who's outwardly very presentable and successful and respectable, and he tries to blackmail her into bed. And one of the characters talks about these interactions between men and women, but often the women's side is silenced. And I wanted to ask you why it was important for you to deal with this aspect of male-female interactions.
I think so. I've let me think that one through for a second. I think that
it's a big one. It's a big question.
I think I've always loved the Victorian era because there's so many books and so much literature out there, and but I think reading literature I've often felt that you don't get a real insight into what women are thinking. I think you get perhaps that third person view from male authors, or you get first person view from female authors who aren't quite free to say what they actually think. Because of the whole kind of structure of the time and what you were supposed to think and how you were supposed to come across in life. So I would imagine, this is just me taking myself back to that time, that you didn't feel comfortable then to reveal what you actually thought. So I really wanted to bring out in my novel somebody who perhaps might be a little bit like Bridget Jones, but in the Victorian era, who is thinking all these thoughts that you would never really know the Victorian woman might be thinking, because they would never be able to say. So I think that was something that I've tried to bring out a little bit in my book. And you can have a lot of fun with it as well, because there's this whole idea that women were so protected and so supposed to be so innocent in life that there's a lot of information withheld from them. So one aspect of the book is that slight ignorance about sex that a lot of women will have faced. And I did a lot of research into the actual literature and the books that people might have read at that time. And my feeling is that, unlike today, where you have so much information available to you, you have the internet, you can find anything out you want, even things you don't want to know, at the touch of a button. But I feel in those days you would have been faced with so much literature, so many books and so much information that just didn't tell you what you wanted to know. So it would have been all this obfuscation. It would have been books that kind of hinted at what sex was about, books that hinted about what went on. And so I wanted to kind of bring that out in the book as well, that kind of impossibility of finding out what you wanted to know.
And that's definitely a frustration that the protagonist, that Violet, feels throughout, that sort of, why do I not know this, or why are things being kept from me? And one of my favorite scenes is sort of, or images, is the whole turkey thing, which I will let the readers and for themselves. I was like, yeah, I've never thought about that. But it's really well done. And is that sort of like, well, obviously that was part of the reason you wanted to create this character. I mean, she's so brilliant, because she is so brave and interesting and different, and also, as you say, slightly at times sort of naive, or not. It was. So was there someone that's an inspiration for the character of Violet, or where did sort of she come from in your mind?
I think there is a tiny bit of Bridget Jones, but a Bridget Jones of her time. I think there is this amazing novelist, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, called Roger Erskine Longrig. And he was a chap in sort of the 1970s, or it might be Roger Longrig Erskine. But anyway, he was around in the 1970s and 80s, and he wrote books under about 7 pseudonyms. So he wrote books on cricket. He wrote a slightly risque novel about schoolgirls in a convent. He wrote books, on horse riding. So he wrote all these different books under different names. And one of the series he wrote was called was by Laura Black. So that was one of his pseudonyms. And it was this Scottish set series of adventures about these different heroines who just lived life to the full, and just threw themselves at life. Got sort of set in Victorian times, I think, as well. And they were forever herring off on horses and falling in love with lords and all sorts of crazy things like that. And I think the heroines in those novels stuck in my mind because they were quite strong and feisty and a little bit kind of uncaring about what other people thought, and just went ahead and lived life full pelt. And actually, for a man writing a woman's perspective, I thought it was really well written and really well understood. So she kind of stayed in my mind a little bit, and I think that's where that's come from.
fantastic. No, I think she's brilliant, and there are many other wonderful female characters. I mean, and such a variety across society, really, and how people are thinking about things. I mean, actually, this is sort of linked to you. I'm going to talk about the first wine that I've paired now, sort of, because a lot of it is about what women might want to do and what they're allowed to do because of reputation. Reputation is a theme that runs through all of the book. Because I mean, even like a proposal that we're kind of on board with literally mentions reputation as one of the main reasons for it. So a lot hangs on women's reputations, and Violet is shunned by friends because her mother disappeared. We don't even know if it's the mother's fault or anything, but sort of just that sort of scandal element makes people, and even Violet's father. So he thinks it's scandalous, and so the idea of reputation and people's assumptions on that is a really fascinating one. And that is why I've decided to pair the theme with Chardonnay, because of Chardonnay's reputation, because I think that Chardonnay's reputation is a tricky thing. Chardonnay is actually my favorite grape. Like, it's the one I go to the most. I think it's absolutely delicious and so versatile, and such a sort of actually a bit like Violet herself, sort of incredibly resilient, versatile grape, or maybe like women in general, put them anywhere they can manage. But there's a lot of people out there who say, oh, you must have heard yourself, like ABC, anything but Chardonnay, which probably stems from, there was a big fashion in the 80s for a lot of oaking of the Chardonnay, and they've got a lot of like these rich buttery oaked wines that were then sort of mass produced and perhaps done more cheaply, and it got a really bad reputation, and it clings on even today. So now you have people saying, oh, I don't drink Chardonnay, whereas in fact, if they're enjoying a Blanc de Blanc champagne, that's Chardonnay. If they're having a white Burgundy or a Chablis, that's Chardonnay. And people think they don't like Chardonnay, but that's because they have preconceptions. So that idea of sort of reputation, preconceptions, was something that picked up through the book, and I thought that was why it would be a lovely pairing with the Chardonnay. So cheers.
Cheers.
That's really gorgeous. It's quite you've got all these lovely sunshine filled fruits there, and it's really smooth, and it's got like a slightly like nuttiness at the back there. Like, absolutely, that's really well done, Wynns. This is an absolutely beautiful wine to start off with as we continue to talk about the book. And actually on that as well, I believe that the winemakers Sue and Sarah are doing a campaign currently, hashtag, obviously got to have a hashtag on your campaigns, particularly on Insta, but it's a hashtag challenging preconceptions, because they don't like they don't adhere to all the conventional rules of wine and the wine industry and stuff. So another reason why that sort of fits in with the major themes of the book. And as I was talking about obviously the strong female characters you've written, not all of them are nice, not all of them are positive. Mrs. Tibbs is pretty interesting, who sort of runs a brothel, and there are different characters there, but there are moments of real female solidarity. I won't give away the ending, because I think people should read this book and really enjoy it, but there is a lovely moment as well when Violet essentially rescues a working girl from the brothel. She picks up that she's not having the madam's house, not having the best time, and going against convention, because obviously it'd be very frowned upon to have a fallen woman in your household. She employs her as a maid in the household, and sort of rescues her from her unfortunate place, which she's not enjoying at all. And so Violet's very inspiring, sort of doing her own thing. I'm not always sure if she thinks it through, or whether she just does what she instinctively thinks is the right thing to do. So I was wondering what you drew on to create such a range of female characters. You weren't, some of them are very human, so I'd love to know a bit more about them.
I think I've always been very observant of people, and I think it just comes from kind of seeing different people across life. So I have a kind of and I've had a really interesting variety of jobs in my life as well. I worked for the circus.
Yeah, I saw that. Can we actually, as a quick segue into that? It's the circus. Tell us more.
Oh, it was when I was young and starting out in life. I did do a kind of crazy list of jobs just because I was excited to work anywhere, and the whole of life seemed like an amazing oyster to be explored. So I did for a while during the Edinburgh Festival work for 6 weeks for the circus in the very glamorous job of fire steward. So I was standing by the tent flaps for three shows a day in case of fire, and my job was to evacuate the audience. There never was a fire, but I did get to know all the tricks and how all the circus performers did their tricks, and someone did invite me to be a trapeze artist, but I never took them up on it.
Oh my goodness, that would have been a different career path.
My life could have changed. But yeah, I had all sorts of bizarre jobs, and I think excuse me, I think
a sip of the wine.
The best cure.
Yeah.
I think that kind of job and that kind of experience in life, and even since then I've worked for museums and galleries and palaces in PR. You do get to meet a whole range of people, and it does give you that kind of sense of just people's differences and quirks, and I think I've very much drawn on that in the book for my female characters. And I think I do have a feeling as well that when women were repressed in the Victorian times, it wasn't just men, it was probably other women as well who were kind of creating that society and those rules within that society about what you should wear when someone dies, and what you should whether you should have a chaperone when you go out and all that sort of thing. A lot of it probably came from the women as well, so I wanted to reflect that and give that a kind of equal billing, I suppose, in the book.
I think it's very, very well done. Just it's not a black and white book at all. What I quite enjoy as well is that there are moments of real reflection on assumptions, not, as you say, not just one-sided. I mean, even Violet sort of reflects with Mr. Parchment. I think she says that maybe she has misjudged some of her previous male suitors, that they're not these terrible, not all of them are probably awful, terrible, evil men, or whatever she assumes they might be. And and also there's a time when she thinks maybe she hasn't given her father the opportunity to get to know her, and so that's something that's definitely reflected on by both men and women in the book. And is that something you were also trying to get across, that we shouldn't?
I think so. I mean, I think it's all too easy, isn't it, to give men a bad rep for what happened in Victorian times or for women's repression, but actually they're living within the prism of what's acceptable and how they've been brought up, and what kind of pressures they're facing in life as well. So
yeah,
it's not, and people are people, and within society you find soft characters and you find not so soft characters, and so I wanted to reflect that within the novel as well, and bring a kind of gentleness to it, I suppose, in that Jeremy Parchment is one of her suitors who has the best intentions, but Violet consistently misreads him all the way through until the
end. And another one of the character, I think probably one of the most fascinating characters, is that of her mother, who isn't even present for most of it. It's just that we hear about her through other people's words, other people's thoughts, Violet's own memories, and she's obviously a very charismatic, beautiful woman who Violet really looks up to. But as the book goes on, and even at the start, you've got these sort of, she is a flawed human being, and that evolves. And there's this lovely, I'm actually going to read it because I just love it so much, but she's talking about her love for her mother and how she had shared her secrets and stories, thrown me advice, scolded with affection, hugged me more fiercely and freely than any other mother I knew. I relied heavily on her, perhaps too much from childhood. And she'd been kind, funny, loving, warm, flawed. And I think it's just, as the book goes on, and obviously towards the end, we reveal so much more about what the mother has done and experienced in her own character. I don't want to again ruin any big moments of the book, but can you tell me a bit more about that relationship and why you portrayed it in this way? That sort of mother, daughter, and the relationship she has with other people around her.
Definitely. So I suppose I wanted to convey the importance of that relationship, and the importance of that mother figure not being around at a kind of crucial moment in Violet's life, when she is starting to live her own life and become independent. So her mother disappears when she's 18. So Violet's just on the cusp of making her debut, and that's kind of put on hold, and her whole life is put on hold because her mother has disappeared. But there's also something about that relationship with her mother that I wanted to bring out, that with the disappearance kind of leaves Violet in this place of not quite knowing how to go forward. So there's things like her mother is very, very beautiful, and by comparison, Violet is not quite sure yet where she sits next to her mother, because whenever they went out together, her mother would get all the attention, all the kind of male admiration. And so I wanted to leave Violet in a bit of a position of not quite being sure where she fits into that picture and why she's being courted by men. It could be because they're interested in her, the scandalous disappearance of her mother. It could be because they think she might be a bit easier to chat up because she's alone and without her mother. So there's all sorts of reasons, and I wanted to kind of bring out that kind of difficulty of her left without that strong, very strong and overpowering female presence in her life, and how she kind of coped with that.
Yeah, it's very touching. And also when she sort of finds out things that she didn't previously know about her mother, and that is that thing I feel that we all go through, where you perhaps have an idealized version of your parents in your head when you're younger. You know, they're gods and they can do no wrong, and then we learn that they're not. And as a parent myself, my son will quickly learn that I'm not. And you know, we learn they're not, and that can be quite surprising, and we might want to protect them, and we might want to be annoyed at them, and the fact that also that they are human beings in their own right, and they want their own joy and their own path, and that's shown not only by the mother and what happens there, but also by Violet's father and his desire to marry a very different sort of woman, and you know, Violet's like confusion at him being happier than she'd ever seen him, and what's going on, which is very humorous but very recognizable. And even though she is, and it's funny because she's obviously such you know, her parents are such big forces in her life, even though she is technically like a aged spinster at 28 and expected to sort of have her own family, and that's that idea that these connections never go. They are those sort of foundations, which yeah, is actually another sort of big topic that you deal with great sort of grace and humor in this in the novel. And there's another wonderful character of might be my favorite, I think, Maria Monk.
Right.
I mean, because she has different sides to her, very dramatic, which is also I'm going to talk about the second wine that I am pairing, because I've sort of, it's a bit of an ode to Maria Monk, really. So the Shiraz that we have here. So Shiraz is also known as Syrah. So Syrah is the name of the grape in sort of the old world, sort of in Europe, and Shiraz is what it's called in you know, the new world, like Australia and stuff, and South Africa and New Zealand. And also they can be sometimes used stylistically, so that people think that, or it's sort of generally thought that Syrah is a more elegant, refined, smooth version of the wine, and Shiraz can be slightly more punchy and spicy and red fruited. I'm just going to open this wine myself. I think that I've actually had this one before, and actually this Shiraz is, I think, actually very elegant and silky in the mouth.
Try it as well.
Mm.
Oh, I love that.
Got,
more a bottle, sorry.
Just all of it. And it's such a brilliant personality wine, because it's got that spice and it's got that acidity, but it's balanced by those rich, smooth, succulent, dark fruit. And obviously, like, Coonawarra is very well known for its Shiraz. It's a beautiful climate for it. It's sort of got a maritime sort of, it's south of Adelaide, and it's sort of slight maritime influence there, and it really creates beautiful Shiraz wines, which this one certainly is. But what I like about it is it's this one grape that has these two sort of very different names, and people think of these two very different styles, and those sorts of, that's sort of like two sides of the same coin. I think it describes quite a lot of women's book, but particularly Maria Monk, who, you know, has had quite the shady past, but now lives in sort of this amazing luxury, where she's very wealthy and she's made it herself, really. And she and in some ways she almost takes on that mothering, not mothering, she's not very motherly, but, you know, when she was just explaining to Violet about sex and about relations, and sort of giving her the information that perhaps a mother would have given had her mother been around. But at the same time, she does a couple of things early on which are very risky to Violet's reputation, and asks things of her, which are, and so I thought she was a really interesting, like, do we like her, do we not? I like her, but I think we all like her by the end. But you know, she's a very interesting character. I mean, apart from Violet, do you have any favorite characters in the book?
Yes, I quite like Septimus Patmore, just because he is, he reminds me, I don't know if you remember the Robin Hood film with Kevin Costner.
Oh,
and Alan Rickman.
Alan Rickman.
Yes. A little bit about him, and I think that's where he's slightly drawn from, and it's that idea of a man who is bad but unashamedly bad, and there's something quite attractive about that.
So I was about to say, I had a small crush on Alan Rickman in that film. So.
Yes, exactly. So there's a little bit of that going on, in that you know that you shouldn't, as a woman, go near such a man, because he's very bad. He has seen Violet's mother in her underwear, which is just shocking. And there's various other things that he does that are not quite par for the course, but you like him anyway because he's a little bit naughty.
He's definitely a little bit naughty. It's a very good character, and the men are really interesting in the book. You know, there's obviously one that I think we all like, the Benjamin character, you know, and he goes through quite a transformation in the book, you know, physically and perspective wise, because he starts as this sort of like limping, gangly, bearded giant, and ends up being really quite attractive. And there is a scene when he's coming out of the sea that sort of reminds me of the Darcy wet shirt scene, in some ways. But yes.
The interesting part about that is that so I did a lot of research into Hastings, where the book is set, and men did bathe naked in the Victorian era, and there was, I think, an indecency patrol that did used to go up and down the beach to make sure that people weren't, you know, looking when they shouldn't look. And
Oh,
and so it's actually a real thing that happens. So yeah, that was it. This is what happens when you do research into a place. So I did masses of research into Hastings, and little things like this crop up and you're like, oh my goodness, that's better than my imagination.
that's fantastic. There is someone in a rowboat looking out for binoculars.
Exactly. And I think at one point the men were told they had to wear underpants in the sea. So one man went into the sea with a pair of underpants on his head instead of where he should have worn them.
Oh, those risque Hastings moments. How brilliant though to spend some time like just researching a place like that, and probably have so much knowledge you could write a book on the history of Hastings.
It was amazing, and I stayed in a Victorian guest house in Hastings. There is a Victorian themed guest house called St Benedict's, where they serve you a proper silver service breakfast, and your whole room is full of kind of Victorian books, and the bed is really high like a Victorian bed would be. So that was a great experience as well, just to kind of go back into what it would have been like to stay in a guest house or a lodging house in those times.
Oh, I'd love to do something like that. That sounds absolutely brilliant. And yeah, on the men, marriage is obviously another big key thing in the book. Violet obviously doesn't want to get married. She's not short of proposals or men's interest, but you know, she doesn't want that particularly for most of the book. And then there's her client, which I thought was really interesting. This wonderful client who just doesn't want to get married and is desperate to find a reason not to marry this perfectly respectable, upstanding man. And it was so interesting that there was this feeling that she had to do it. Are you sure there's no reason I can't? So you sure you can't find something? And because a woman obviously would be mad to say no otherwise. So I thought that was, and there are others who obviously do want to get married. Sort of Maria Monk alludes to the fact that she never sort of had that joy, and obviously Violet's father wants to get remarried to someone that he's more compatible with, but it's often portrayed not as an ideal scenario for everyone. Yet there is a romance involved in this story, you know, so there is a romantic aspect to that. So I just wanted to ask you a bit of that, like why marriage is portrayed negatively and positively, and why there's a romance there, and a bit more about that.
Definitely. I think so again, a little bit inspired by Hastings. In the Victorian era, there was quite a population of spinsters in Hastings. I think a lot of them moved to the seaside for their health, and often they were quite rich. And they did set up quite a few of these improving societies. There's quite a few charities mentioned in the book, and I think they did often set up quite improving charities and try and help the local people. So I suppose that kind of inspiration of idea of, there was probably quite a lot of women who were happy at that time being single, and didn't, and also there was probably a shortage of men because of all the wars and various things like that as well. So I wanted to show that side of things, and then obviously very aware of what marriage meant for a woman at that time. So a lot of women had upwards of 7 to 13 children, some of whom might die in childbirth, and I think part of it came from me wanting to free up Violet from that idea of what marriage entailed, which is also why she's not that good at domestic matters, because I feel I could have easily written a book where Violet did nothing but empty the privy and clean the clean the floorboards and empty the coal scuttle, that kind of thing, because I think that the housework would have been such a massively dominant part of being a woman in that time. And I had to give her servants to help out with that, because otherwise there wouldn't have been a book. So it is that kind of idea of what marriage means for a woman at that time, and how I could free Violet up a little bit from that.
There are just so many interesting parts of this book. It's incredibly enjoyable to read, but there are so many sort of, unfolding and encompassing themes that are still relevant today, very relevant today, and very recognizable, and dealt with so much humor. And as I said, I love your turn of phrase. It's so much through the book. It's so evocatively, beautifully done. So yeah, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about the book, or anything about your writing of it?
I don't think so. I just hope it's the kind of book that if you're having a bad day and you want a bit of cheering up, that you can just grab this book and read it. And I am getting good feedback that it's the kind of book that people race through. So for me, I'm very, very happy if people read it in 2 days. So I do hope it's the kind of book that will just bring people a bit of joy. I think we all need it at the moment. So yeah, that's my main aspiration, I think.
No, it's very, very enjoyable. And yeah, every chapter you've got sort of a new piece of information, or a bit of misleading information, and you think it's going to go one way, and then it goes something else. And there is quite a big event at the end of the book, which is quite shocking, actually. So I did not see that coming. So I was like, what? But yeah, so yeah, it is very well done in that kind of, it wants to keep you reading. There is a real pace to it, but as you say, it is, although it is gripping, it is enjoyably and often very gently and humorously done. So a real skill. Thank you so much for writing it for us. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me about this book. I will show everyone, so this is the No Life for a Lady, which is just very good fun. And so thank you very much. And also a big thank you to Wynn's, our wine sponsor of this pairing pages. These are absolutely fantastic wines. You can see why we will continue with these in our own time. You can see why that's such a well-known wine producer, and also why they are so perfectly paired with this this book about an unconventional woman. So thank you very much, everyone. And thank you everyone for joining us. We hope that you have enjoyed this conversation very much. Thank you. Bye.